The scope of this project was a simple one, even if the execution is a touch complicated. These big motors, they need oil, and at startup it can take them quite a bit of time. In fact, the NHC 250 is somewhat famous for making noise until it actually develops oil pressure, and I hate that. Oh, do I hate that.
I'm just gonna let her sit and stumble. That oil pressure took a long dang time to come up.
I knew what I wanted, but not necessarily how to get there. I went through a couple of different versions in my testing, starting with an accumulator. I eventually discarded that. It's just too many moving parts. Then I was going to go for some sort of timed pre-oil pump that was attached to the ignition. And again, why? Why induce all of that sophistication? I stripped the project down to its bare bones. I want to tap oil, and I want to inject that oil into the block in such a way that I put pressure on my bearings. I didn't need much pressure, just a little. A few psi would be good enough. But how do I get that oil, and how do I get it in? Those were the questions that had to be answered. And I think in the end, it's a nice system.
Clearly, if you're going to pre-oil, you need something to pre-oil with. And therein lies the rub. Where are you going to get the oil from? I decided that what I just need is a pump that I can pump until I get the pressure of the oil that I need and desire. Well, how are you going to get at that oil? You got to get out of the oil pan. And originally, my idea involved tapping the side of the oil pan and actually putting a bulkhead fitting in there so that I could pull out. And then my father, when I was mentioning it to him, said, well, what about that port on the side? What about the fitting on the side? And he thought that we could build a spacer or a T, find a T for that line. And I realized we're overthinking it. All I need to do is drill and tap it. And so that's what I've done, is I've drilled right here and tapped off a port. Tucks nice tight against the side of the oil pan. It's out of the way, and it gives me lots and lots of good volume oil. You'll have to forgive me. I'm using the spare motor on the trailer here just because, well, it's easier to point at. One of the reasons I decided this was the winner is because they're really quite common and quite cheap, and if this was a completely bad idea, to undo the system 100%, I just got to unscrew that fitting, get a new one of these, bolt it on, and we're done. And same if you made a mistake. You get a second crack at her. That's why I ended up choosing to use this point right here. Alright, so here's the system coming out of the pan. This is that fitting that I drilled and tapped. You'll notice the one-way check valve up here is missing. No matter what I did, I could not pull oil through it. I just couldn't do it. I can push oil through, but I can't suck oil through. Even though it worked on the testing in the bench, I just couldn't do it. So I had to take that back out. And now we're just pulling oil straight out of that port. Now the reason I wanted that one-way check valve was so that if something happened and this hose got ripped off, then the check valve spring pressure would keep me from losing the oil in the pan and you know, keep it all together. It's a worst nightmare scenario. So because I can't have that down there and the idea makes me nervous, what I've done is I've routed the hose nice and tight against the oil pan and built this bracket here to hold the hose secure right up here snug. So there's no bouncing around, there's no getting around. I also have built a skid plate that bolts on the four corners of the oil pan there and comes out and covers, so that if something's going to get it, it's going to have to come around the skid plate and in. And quite frankly, the chances of that happening, given that we do not hardcore off-road this thing. So this is the skid plate I built for the oil pan. It's got, you know, there's four holes in it, 5/16 bolts, about an inch and a quarter of thread up in there. It's more than I thought there would be. And I just got this cut out here and this little hump, right, to clear. That's where the oil fitting comes out of the block. And then this is where my drain plug is. And I have one of those Fumoto lever valve drain plugs, which totally recommend anybody who's ever frantically had that thing pull that big old plug and then sploof, right, and you're trying to hang on to it and you got a second 5-gallon bucket handy, you need to make the swap midstream. It's always hard to stop midstream, right guys? So anyways, what I did is I lifted it right here. I just cut it, right, lifted it up, I slid a bar across, pounded it back down so that I got this little flat. And what is it AVE says? Grinder and paint make me the welder I ain't. But that makes room for that fitting to come off, and it provides this little ramp which is higher than the level of the Fumoto valve lever, which is right here. You know, I know it's what, 1/8 inch, right? But there's no point in you guys bolting 1/2 inch plate on there. It's 4 5/16 bolts into aluminum. What I'm trying to do is stop road debris kicking up, and I really wanted it to come over and basically armor plate where I've tapped into that oil body so that nothing can come flipping up and smack the hoses. This is the whole reason right here, is the whole reason I made the sheet, but I figured as long as I had some steel from the scrap bin and it was big enough, I might as well cover the whole bottom. This will also let me slap a magnetic oil pan heater on, which could be really convenient. Let her go, heat the oil pan up, and you're pumping warm oil. Because right now I have a water heater, so I have a warm block, and then I pump ice cold oil through it. I don't know, I've never liked that. But this will let me put a magnetic heater on. It won't be super efficient because there'll be an air gap, but whatever. Sticks. Not the Rubicon. Sticks. You know, I'm only talking about like road debris, and it's got to get up behind this axle, up in. It's going to be pretty edge extreme case. So I'm comfortable with that. Skid plate, this bracket holding the hose out of the way. I understand that if this U-joint at either end of the driveline were to come loose, I'm going to rip the hose off. But you've got to realize if this comes loose, you're going to rip the oil pan off too. So I don't really think trying to cage this to prevent it, that's going to a level of borderline insanity. So I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to make sure you do your maintenance checks. So that's the system. I have the oil pan skid plate off of it right now, just because I wanted to show where I routed everything. That then goes up and goes to the oil pump. And of course this is the main suction line for the truck itself. So now I'm going to put that skid plate on, and this down here will be all wrapped up. And there it is. Anything that wants to get that hose has to come by this, so it has to go up and around. So I think we're going to be fine. I'm so freaking paranoid about bolting something to the dang oil pan. There's my Vexento valve. Now, if anything were to come up here, I mean, it's got a spring detent and all that, but now if anything were to come up here, it has to, so it should slide right by. I like that. I almost made this years ago for this purpose right here, but I'm glad I got this. And I thought about wrapping it up, but it's overbuilding it. It's fine. It's going to collect crap. I'm not a fan of that. Yeah, so there's the skid plate setup and the mounting hose retention system. And between the two of them, I think we are going to be A-okay. So the oil line comes up and joins all of these brake air hoses, and it comes all the way up to the pump. This is a 24 volt fuel oil pump designed to pump waste oil out of the crankcases of engines on boats. So it's essentially an oil change pump, but for ships. Well, I saw it as high as 23 psi. It says it'll develop as high as 30. I never pushed it that hard. And it was putting out about a gallon a minute, completely unloaded. It comes out of the pump, comes down around and into the oil filter housing, because the last thing I want to do is pump unfiltered oil into the engine. This is a Fram P8, one of the world's most cheap standardized filters. It goes out of that over to the inlet, or I should say the test port on the oil cooler, and that's where I actually inject the oil. This is a gauge that I've got screwed into just a block port. In fact, right over there is where the truck gets the oil pressure from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside the cab, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the pump, and it will, after it's had a time to pump up the oil, it'll register pressure down here, which is on the complete opposite side of the block, both, horizontally and vertically. So I think it's a pretty good test there. The motor has now been sitting about 2 hours since the last time I ran the pump, so it should be fairly well drained out. And this way you'll get a chance to see just how long it takes to build any pressure at all. So just watch that needle move. And again, I don't need 80 psi. I'd be happy with 2. I seem to get 10. Well, I must have developed some pressure because I can see the needle moving. I'm slowly learning what it sounds like, and I believe that I'm going to be okay in that I can kind of tell from the sound the pump makes when it begins pushing against pressure as opposed to just pushing. That's the pump up there, and you'll notice that I have it mounted to a plate, okay, but I also have it supported on the nose right here with a piece of foam, so that the weight of the pump is not hanging off of it. Pump was 80. Oil filter housing was 23. I ended up buying a whole spool of the hose. I don't know how much I used. I should have measured that. But I bought a whole spool of the hose there. I have a number of fittings, 1/2 inch pipe to 3/8 pipe reducers. This is a 90-degree 3/8 fitting. Down there I've got a 1/4 inch pipe to 3/8 fitting. That's what's on that other one. And on the other side over here we have 3/8 coming out, and then this is a one-way check valve, which only allows, this is the oil coming, filtered oil coming from the pump, only allows it down in, not back up. So when the truck is actually running, you know, there's going to be 40 psi oil pressure pushing back, holding that valve closed. So this little pump won't be able to push any oil in at all. So this will be the new starting procedure. Kick the main on, turn the ignition on, and begin the world's loudest buzzer. So what would have been the standard ether start switch is now my pump switch, right? Now you can hear the pump begin to labor, so you know that we're starting to pump some oil and build a little pressure. So I'm going to go ahead and try to start the truck. Now, of course, this thing hasn't run in, I don't know, month and a half, 2 months. What I'm hoping is that we get 0 delay on the oil pressure rising. In fact, if we got success, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prime the pump. This thing has not, the motor has not run in over a month and a half. This is a 100% dead cold look at the system. I'm going to turn the main switch on, hit the ignition. We all get to bask in the world's loudest squeaking alarm. And then I'm going to go ahead and try priming it with the pump. And I have no idea how long or what, so I'll just go by ear and probably give it a taste 10-15 seconds. Then when I think I've got some pressure built up, I'm going to go ahead and start it. If this works, we should watch that oil pressure immediately come up, as opposed to laying there at the bottom for such a depressingly long amount of time. Again, I don't really expect the truck to start. I'd be proud of it if it started. Main switch on. Okay, I saw the needle twitch. Here we go. We had oil pressure immediately upon starting. Cold and unhappy, but she's running. I'll know if we're backfeeding through the oil auxiliary pump if those lines get warm. They should get warm right away as the motor heats the oil if I'm backfeeding. If not, if they stay cold, then I know that that check valve is working, and there's no reason to believe it shouldn't work.
Man, I hope this motor doesn't just immediately blow up on us this spring like all the other ones did. I don't know if I can continue if I'm losing a motor a year. I don't know. These things are just so big. If this one can't hold together, I even get like a tightening in my chest just thinking about it. Instant oil pressure. Hot dang. I am a happy boy.
So there you have it. It worked. It actually worked really, really well. Especially on a motor that already had been primed. Got pressure right away. So I'm hoping that's what it'll be like when I start it giving tours time and time and time again, each and every day. You know, everything is at your own risk, and I will absolutely update if mine turns into a staggering ball of fail. Regardless, it was a fun project. Thanks for watching.